I'm gonna be honest, this episode is kind of like a sneaky way to introduce the thousands of new subscribers that have come to this channel from my Digital Circus SCPs episodes to some of my superhero-related series, like putting cartoon characters on the Suicide Squad, or Venomizing characters, putting characters into My Hero Academia, or the wider Marvel Universe. And even though we only have one episode of the Amazing Digital Circus to pull from right now, with some help from things like fan theories that people have mentioned to me in the comments, like the idea that Kinger is secretly the one who created the Digital Circus in the first place, I think I was able to come up with some pretty interesting stories and some fun designs. So let's see how this goes, shall we? Let's go!
Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
When Bellerive prisoner XDDCC awoke in her cell for the first time, she was confused and terrified. She couldn't remember how she'd gotten there or why, and worse still, she couldn't even remember her own name. She ran to the door and banged on it relentlessly, trying to get anyone to come and speak to her and tell her what was going on. At first, a guard came by and just told her to be quiet, but eventually, someone with more authority came with at least some answers. Amanda Waller ensured that the prisoner's arms and feet were chained, then went into her cell to tell her that she had been arrested for helping the notorious madman, the Joker, to destroy Gotham National Bank, killing dozens of people in the process. Waller said that the prisoner had been caught on camera professing her allegiance to the Joker and that her name was Pomni, seemingly referring to the fact that she was essentially like a cheerleader for both Joker and his partner who'd replaced Harley Quinn, called Punchline. The prisoner swore this couldn't be true, that even if she didn't remember anything about her life, she could feel that she was a good person who didn't want to hurt anyone. But Waller quickly provided proof, showing the prisoner footage of herself as Pomni outmaneuvering and stabbing to death a SWAT team that had gone into the bank before its destruction. While she didn't want to admit it, Pomni was mesmerized by watching how agile and skilled she was with a knife, but it still felt wrong to her. On top of that, something struck the prisoner about the name Pomni. Even without any memory of her life, she quickly recognized the word Pomni as meaning remember in Russian. Was she Russian herself? She didn't have a Russian accent, or had the word been some kind of sick coded message to her by the Joker? Either way, she didn't reveal this knowledge to her captor as of yet. Amanda Waller then claimed she too believed it likely that whoever Pomni was before the Joker got to her had been brainwashed by him in order to get her on his side, but there was no proof of this. Of course, this wasn't completely true. Waller did have evidence she was sitting on that a good enough lawyer could use to get Pomni out of Bellerive, but she couldn't pass up having someone close to the Joker joining her Suicide Squad. Waller told Pomni that if she really wanted to find proof of her innocence, then her best way to do that was by joining Task Force X, a team of other inmates in Bellerive who all had their own unique gifts, skill sets, and abilities. Not only would joining the team reduce Pomni's prison sentence in case they didn't find evidence of her innocence, but the group was about to be sent into Gotham to capture Joker's ally, Punchline, so that they could interrogate her on information of what the Joker was up to next. Waller also promised that her people would try and get any information out of Punchline about Pomni that could possibly help her remember who she was or even get her released. Still anxious about her whole situation, Pomni agreed, and a few days later was taken to meet her team. They were exactly as ragtag as she would have expected. A guy who could detach his limbs and still choke someone out with them, who went by the name Arm Fall Off Boy. A crazy hulking fishman named King Shark, who'd apparently been on the team longer than anyone. A very sarcastic rabbit man who always had a menacing grin spread across his face. And even more who'd be swapped in and out across various missions. Pomni was put through initial training, and like how she'd recognized the word Pomni, the prisoner was amazed by how easily and quickly her acrobatic and bladed weaponry skills came back to her. Let loose into a training facility, she quickly proved to herself that she was a formidable fighter. And it had her eyeing the exits a few times, thinking she could possibly handle any of the guards and escape. But of course, soon that wouldn't be possible. A bomb was planted inside the base of her neck that Waller could detonate at any time if members of Task Force X went off mission or tried to run. So, for the time being, Pomni was stuck with an identity she didn't remember getting, skills she didn't remember acquiring, and a team she certainly didn't ask to be a part of. But at least she had a clear mission: help the Suicide Squad take down Punchline so she could find evidence of who she was and hopefully return to a normal life. Mo Kafka prided himself in being the funniest guy in his office at the tabloid news site Threats and Menaces, run by former Daily Bugle editor J. Jonah Jameson. Many of his co-workers did find him to be quite funny, and every time they laughed at his jokes, that just furthered his desire and need for their attention. Though there was one woman in the office who never laughed at any of his jokes: Cindy Moon. No matter how hard he tried, he could never make her laugh and could barely get her attention. This led him to think she even hated him. In truth, Cindy was just always focused on getting ahead on her work, so that if she needed to duck out and secretly fight crime or help out Spiderman as her alter ego, Silk, she could do so easily. Unfortunately, Mo wasn't the most mentally stable guy and was deeply insecure. His mother, Dr. Ashley Kafka, a psychiatrist who worked with supervillains on the Supermax prison The Raft, had tried to help him get over his mental health problems, but Mo often refused to acknowledge he had any, and while a psychiatrist can arm someone with the knowledge and tools to heal themselves, if that person is unwilling to try, then not much can be done. The more Mo tried to get on Cindy's good side and the more he failed, the more furious he became. And eventually that anger would draw an unexpected ally to him. You see, Dr. Kafka had been given the task of helping Eddie Brock, locked up in the raft by Spider-Man after he'd gotten an alien symbiote off him. Spider-Man also thought he'd successfully launched the symbiote into space to never be heard from again, but it had returned and was now seeking a way into the raft. The alien slime, still linked to Eddie's mind, could hear that he was being treated by Dr. Kafka, and that she saw him once a week. The symbiote found Dr. Kafka and disguised itself, attaching to her lab coat so that she would walk it right into Eddie's cell and they could reunite. But when it got to Kafka's home and sensed the anger in her son, it couldn't resist getting a hold of him as well. Symbiotes are able to reproduce by simply splitting off a new piece of themselves, so the Venom symbiote did just that, creating a new spawn that called itself Abstractor. This new symbiote then attached to Mo, and once it did, the young man quickly embraced it. It furthered his anger and elevated his need for attention, while also somehow making it feel like it was sating those needs. The next day at work, he was blatantly acting more aggressive, and after telling a joke that Cindy didn't pay attention to, he called her out in front of everyone for not having a sense of humor. He caused such a big scene that he was promptly fired and escorted out of the building by security. Cindy certainly paid attention to him then, but it was because she noticed something in his eyes along with his obvious, more abrasive demeanor. She got into costume after work and tried following him at a distance to see if anything was up, but his symbiote was watching every angle around him, and when it saw a spider trailing behind, it completely overtook Mo, and in a new form together they attacked Silk. They even managed to attach to her temporarily, get into her mind and see that this was indeed Cindy Moon. Cindy tried apologizing to Mo for not laughing at his jokes, and she hadn't even noticed she wasn't paying attention to him, she was just focused on her work. But now, that wasn't enough. Mo, in his altered mental state, saw it as a good thing that Cindy Moon was Silk, because he finally had a reliable way of drawing her eye. As Silk, she had no choice but to pay attention to a supervillain, so that's exactly what he became. Abstractor would become a genuine menace to Silk and all of New York, teaming up with his symbiote kin, Venom and Carnage on multiple occasions, and concocting the biggest, most eye-catching crimes he could think of. His symbiote-enhanced form even had multiple eyes spread across it, always looking at the people around him to see who was and was not paying attention to him. So, while many villains became who they were out of a lust for wealth, or power, or revenge, Abstractor did it just to sate his unending yearning for attention.
Quick interruption to say that if you like that Venomized drawing, Monday's episode coming up is actually going to be all about taking characters from the new Spider-Man 2 game and venomizing them. So if you're not subscribed and you want to see that, you might want to subscribe and maybe even ring the bell so you get notified. Also, if you want hard copies of a whole bunch of my Venomized drawings, you might like my new Monsters of the Multiverse art book, which is actually 20% off right now using the code EVERYTHING20, valid only till the end of November 12th this weekend. I didn't even know about this sale till the day this video is coming out because it's a sale on everything on the site that I print print through Blurb. But anyway, this book's got demons and dragons and SCPs, including 6 of my Digital Circus SCPs. It's got aliens and more, including a whole bunch of Venomized characters. From Venomized Pokemon and cartoon characters, a bunch of My Hero Academia characters. The book and the discount code Everything20 will be linked in the description and the pinned comment. But speaking of My Hero Academia characters, let's see what Zooble would be like in My Hero Academia. Let's go!
For much of the life they could remember, the quirk user known only as Zooble was essentially a walking identity crisis. They couldn't remember their own name, gender, age, or how they'd come to be in the colorfully decorated underground lab of Dr. Kyudai Garaki, the madman more commonly known for creating the Nomu that heroes of Japan were often forced to contend with. Like most of the other quirk users in the underground, Zooble was forced to go through rigorous training day in and day out against the Nomu to enhance their powers, and Garaki would often inject them full of experimental concoctions to try and enhance their powers further. None of the group knew what exactly they were being trained for, but Zooble did know that they were not on board for whatever it was. Kyudai Garaki and other members of a group called the League of Villains would come to them and go on rants about a new world order and how it was needed and that heroes needed to be defeated so that the new reign could begin. But Zooble wasn't buying any of it. Zooble hated Garaki and the League and was just generally annoyed by everything that happened in that underground. They wanted to remember their life and be free, though Zooble was fond of furthering their skills and their powers. Zooble's quirk was called Detach. Their body was built like a mishmash of different colored limbs that could split off, fly around their body, and still function as normal, able to punch, kick, and choke any opponent sent after them. They could also stretch parts of their body, and it was very difficult to penetrate their skin. Part of the reason Zooble liked enhancing their skills with their powers so much was because they intended to get strong enough to use them to escape. But soon, all those in the underground would get much more help with that than they could have expected. The #1 ranked hero, Endeavor, along with a group of 3 students from UA High allied with him as a part of their work studies program, Izuku Midoriya, Katsuki Bakugo, and Shoto Todoroki, had been tipped off about a villain base in their jurisdiction. They hadn't expected it to be a full-blown lab run by Garaki. Upon Endeavor seeing the group of young quirk users trapped in the underground, he told Midoriya to go ensure they were alright. Zooble quickly gave him a rundown of their experience being trapped down there, and Midoriya told them they were all getting out that day. Zooble and most of the trapped quirk users all helped fight off the Nomu that Garaki unleashed to try and defeat the heroes, and the combination of Endeavor, his skilled UA High helpers, and Zooble's imprisoned allies were all more than enough to defeat everything Garaki sent their way. The Doctor managed to escape, but at least Zooble and the others were finally free. They were all very grateful, though this event still hadn't answered any questions about who they were and what their lives had been before being captured. But Endeavor swore that his hero agency would do all they could to find out. In the meantime, Zooble wanted to go after the League of Villains, but was told that only registered heroes could legally do that. Zooble didn't care much for rules, but upon some encouragement from Midoriya, decided to apply for the next year's admissions to UA High. Others of Zooble's fellow prisoners agreed to all do the same, and they all easily passed the entrance exam, already having extensive training, far beyond that of most who applied. So, while Zooble was still doing much of what they'd done in that underground, training and working alongside their fellow Garaki experimented upon quirk users, it felt very different now. They all had a real goal that was truly their own: become full-fledged heroes, hunt down the League of Villains, and find out who they'd been before having their memories and lives taken away. Many regions of the world have had their share of animosity and fear targeted at mutants, those born with superhuman abilities that often manifest in their early teenage years. But one place that was crueler to them than most was the island of Genosha. While it is now a safe haven for mutant kind, it used to be a place ruled over by the king and his queen who allowed mutants to be used as slave labor for the rest of the island's citizens. Though the king did always fear that the people would discover he had a dark little secret, then throw him into the mines as well. You see, while he'd hidden it for decades, the king himself was a mutant, with the ability to control insects. He even kept a collection of them in his impenetrable castle, intending to use them to protect himself if a time came where he needed them. But when that time did come, he could not bear to use the insects on his accuser. You see, he'd even kept this secret of his abilities from his own wife, the Queen, but when she one day discovered his powers, their years of marriage were not enough for her to forgive this deception. She was adamant that mutants did not deserve the same normal lives as their other citizens, and she told the guards and eventually all her people of their king's treachery. He was beaten badly, then stripped of his royal title, and, as he'd feared, hurled into the mines with many other mutants, where he'd do forced labor for the rest of his life. Or so the Queen had claimed anyhow. Her reign would not last too much longer. Of course, most mutants in the mines hated the king for having allowed them to be enslaved for much of his reign, so the king took on a new persona. He acted manic and easily afraid, while also trying to make it seem like he had no memory of his time as the king, leading people to believe that the beating he'd taken had given him brain damage. He spoke kindly to all the mutants in the mines, and eventually, over his first 3 years in there, the others would come to accept him. Mutants would come and go, either dying off or being transferred to new areas, and eventually those around him wouldn't even have much knowledge of his past life as the king, even in spite of the name he'd taken on, Kingsect, a mutant who'd use his command of bugs to aid in the movement of mind materials. You see, even while trying to get others to accept his new identity, all the while the king was still plotting to overthrow his wife and take back command of Genosha. Though eventually he'd find it wasn't her he needed to overthrow. After the king had been in the mines for 4 years, a revolution occurred. The world outside Genosha had learned of how the country was thriving on the back of mutant slave labor, and this brought groups like the X-Men and Magneto's Brotherhood of Mutants to them to start a period of civil war and unrest. When the dust settled on all these conflicts, the Queen had been killed, and Magneto had been accepted as the new leader of the country, turning it from a place that feared and exploited mutants to one that embraced and revered them. Everyone in the mines was quickly set free, including the former king, and while he seemed on the surface to still be the lovable, damaged, quirky mutant from the mines, he was truly coming up with a new plot to dethrone Magneto and take command of Genosha for himself once more. He'd happily embrace mutants now that it was clear his people were willing to. He truly didn't care what rules he had to put in place to be accepted as the ruler once more. He just saw the throne as his birthright, and he'd do whatever he had to get it back.
If you want more Digital Circus content and you haven't seen my amazing Digital Circus SCPs episodes, I've got 2 of them now, where I'm essentially making the characters a little bit more realistic looking and a little bit creepier, and I'll have those linked in the cards in the description. Or if you want to check out some of my other superhero related things, I'll link the playlist of what I consider to be the best ones. Things like turning Spider-Man villains into Spider-Man, or turning Marvel heroes into DC villains. Whole bunch of cool stuff in that playlist. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is a quote from Gary Vaynerchuk, who says that the sooner you become comfortable with losing, the sooner you'll live a happy life. If you're okay with losing, that means you're going to be way more likely to go after the things you want out of your life. And even through all those experiences where you feel like you're defeated or beaten or you lose, you're going to be able to bounce back from that quickly and keep going. And as long as you keep trying to achieve whatever it is you're trying to achieve, you can't keep losing forever. I hope that's inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday. Goodbye.